Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. First, I'll look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was born on February 19, 1960, in London, England. He is the second son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Andrew's older brother is King Charles III. On July 23, 1986, Andrew married Sarah Ferguson. On the same day, he became the Duke of York. The couple had 2 daughters and divorced in 1996. In 2003, Andrew obtained a 75-year lease on a 30-room mansion in Windsor Great Park called the Royal Lodge. It cost him an initial payment of £1 million and £7.5 million in renovations. His annual rent is a peppercorn, meaning a very small symbolic payment. His ex-wife Sarah moved into the same mansion in 2008, although she lived in a separate wing. Over time, Andrew's legacy, if one wants to call it that, was shaped by his friendship with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. Their relationship allegedly involved money changing hands, at least at one point. For example, Sarah Ferguson claimed that Andrew made an arrangement for Jeffrey to pay off one of her debts in the amount of £15,000. After Jeffrey found himself in trouble with the law in 2006, it became pretty clear that being his friend was not a favorable position as far as the public was concerned. Andrew claimed that he stopped having any contact with Jeffrey Epstein that same year, 2006. However, he traveled to New York City to visit with him 4 years later in December 2010. This was after Jeffrey had pleaded guilty to terrible offenses. The men were photographed together in Central Park. Andrew explained this by saying that he was only there to tell Jeffrey that they could not be seen together. One could make a good argument that a better way not to be seen in public together is not to spend time in public together. Apparently, this reasoning was outside of Andrew's capability. In 2014, a court filing in Florida accused Andrew of having sex with a woman named Virginia Giuffre in 2001. At that time, she was known as Virginia Roberts and was 17. She claimed that Jeffrey forced her to participate in sexual activities with Andrew on 3 occasions, once in London, once in New York, and once in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Evidence supporting her claim came in the form of a photograph featuring her, Andrew, and Jeffrey's assistant and conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. Furthermore, flight logs indicated that Virginia and Andrew were in the 3 places Virginia mentioned at the times when she said the sex occurred. Hoping to reduce the severity of his public relations problem, Andrew gave an interview to the BBC in November 2019. Characterizing the interview as disastrous is the understatement of the millennium. Here are a few key revelations from the interview. Andrew claimed that he had no recollection of meeting Virginia or posing for the notorious photograph. He had memory problems, which conveniently rendered him incapable of answering key questions. Andrew did not know Jeffrey well, although he did stay with him in various places all around the world, and mentioned how Jeffrey gave him incredible opportunities. Andrew never saw Jeffrey surrounded by young females, but then he changed his story and said he believed they were members of Jeffrey's staff. So he did see them after all. Virginia had claimed that during their meeting in London, Andrew was sweating profusely. He indicated that during his service in the Falklands War, an adrenaline overdose led to a condition that made it impossible for him to sweat. There is no scientific reason to believe that claim. In the wake of this disastrous interview, Andrew went on a losing streak. His reputation had been destroyed. In August 2021, Virginia sued Andrew, saying that he caused her emotional distress. In January 2022, Andrew was forced to give up his military titles and royal charities. Also, he would no longer use His Royal Highness. In February 2022, a settlement was reached between Andrew and Virginia, which involved Andrew paying Virginia money. The amount was never disclosed, but it is estimated to be between £3 million and £12 million. No public money was used to pay that settlement. In April 2023, Andrew's brother, King Charles III, cut his £249,000 annuity, which had been given to him by Queen Elizabeth II. In April 2025, Virginia died, which made it seem like Andrew's problems may resolve after all. However, that wasn't the case. On October 21, 2025, Virginia's memoir was published. It contained more details about Andrew's alleged offenses, although no new allegations. The alleged details were enough to generate renewed calls from the public for Andrew to face consequences. In mid-October 2025, Andrew announced that, after a discussion with the king, he would relinquish the use of his title, Duke of York. He said that the, quote, continued accusations about me distract from the work of His Majesty and the royal family, unquote. Andrew may have believed that his losing streak had come to a close. Maybe he had finally satisfied his detractors, but there was still more bad news on the way. On October 30, 2025, Buckingham Palace released a statement which read, quote, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has, to date, provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make it clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse, unquote. Andrew is still permitted to identify as the son of Queen Elizabeth II, but he will not be referred to as His Royal Highness. Also, he will not belong to the Order of the Garter or be Knight Grand Cross of the Victorian Order, two other titles that he had held. Despite all these losses, Andrew still retains one honor. He is eighth in line to be king. To remove him would require an act of Parliament and consent of 14 countries that still consider Charles to be king, including Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Andrew will be moving to Sandringham. This is a royal residence about 100 miles north of London that is personally owned by King Charles III. The king will make a private provision for Andrew. Sarah Ferguson will be moving out of the Royal Lodge as well and finding her own place to live. Now moving to my analysis. Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein was troublesome. However, if that was his only problem, he probably could have maneuvered out of it. Many people associated with Jeffrey. He was wealthy and traveled a lot. He spent time in elite circles. Simply knowing him would not automatically destroy someone's reputation. The real problem for Andrew was Virginia. The accusations that she made against him built upon his association with Jeffrey to make Andrew look guilty. Andrew's best move was to remain silent. The British royal family has a reputation for not engaging in prolonged or in-depth interviews. This is a tradition. If Andrew had simply stayed quiet, people would have attributed that behavior to him being a prince. Essentially, he had a built-in way of remaining silent while not looking suspicious. Instead of taking advantage of this, Andrew decided to give the interview to the BBC. If he had stayed quiet, Virginia's later moves would have actually helped him significantly. He would have ended up looking better. For example, Virginia essentially admitted to falsely accusing the attorney Alan Dershowitz, and toward the end of Virginia's life, she lied about the nature of a vehicle collision that she was involved in and claimed that she only had 4 days to live. Virginia was her own worst enemy as far as credibility. She had this in common with Andrew. The only thing Andrew needed to do was wait and let Virginia make mistakes. His eagerness to talk to the media was stronger than his common sense. If Andrew insisted on participating in the interview, which was a terrible idea, he at least should have been prepared. He did not distance himself enough from Jeffrey, and he didn't seem to defend himself vigorously against Virginia's accusations. One would think that, if Andrew was innocent, he would have really had some negative things to say about Virginia. There would have been no mercy, no compassion. He would have unloaded on her. Instead, it seemed like he was trying to be careful about locking in a story in case contradictory evidence came to light later. This way he could say that he never committed to one particular path. He wanted to leave himself open. In a sense, his cautiousness became an inculpatory factor. After that interview, Andrew entered a freefall as far as his reputation, sustaining one brutal loss after another. Many members of the public grew tired of Andrew being in the news constantly. He was a source of embarrassment to the royal family on an ongoing basis. This may have contributed to the drastic decision by King Charles III. Having Andrew lose a little bit at a time, like money and titles, was not satisfying the public. It felt like he was not facing a definitive consequence. Rather, Andrew was giving up just enough to appease his detractors. The king may have felt that it was time for a significant and final maneuver, which clearly illustrated his attitude toward his younger brother. There would be no more half measures. Andrew would lose his status as a prince. Nothing could be more humiliating or devastating for a royal. This was the only accomplishment Andrew was known for, being born into a royal family. Andrew would have been much better off giving up all his titles on his own, rather than having them taken from him. He lacked initiative. He failed to get ahead of the problem, and he was devoured by the allegations and his own missteps. I find it interesting that Andrew did not turn against the establishment. Many people disapprove of the British royal family, thinking of it as antiquated and unnecessary. Andrew could have latched onto this sentiment and played the victim. He could have blamed them for his predicament. This is known as pulling a Prince Harry and Meghan. Maybe he could have struck a deal with Netflix and produced a tasteless cooking show called With Love, Andrew. He certainly could not have performed any worse than Meghan did. At this point, Andrew is pretty much at the bottom of the British royal family, maybe even worse than that, arguably not part of the family at all. He has been completely excluded. He is without title, without purpose, without dignity, a pariah who will be banished to a dark corner of a large family estate. Reportedly, he will not even be invited to join his family members at Christmas. Andrew will live out the remainder of his days as a wretched embarrassment, a creepy man, formerly known as Prince. Those are my thoughts in the case of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. One thing I've noticed from covering cases over the years involving people who are arrogant is they tend to believe that all they need to do to change the minds of other people is to talk. They don't need to have evidence available. They don't need to have video. They don't need to have witnesses. They just need to say things. That seems to be what happened here with Andrew. I don't know if he is guilty or not, but he certainly does seem arrogant. He believed that conducting this BBC interview would somehow eliminate all his problems. He truly believed that it was a solution. All he had to do was talk. If he talked to the interviewer, people would say, "Oh, we have misjudged Andrew. All those accusations must be false. Clearly, he is innocent. Now we can go on and focus on other things." It never occurred to Andrew that he could make things worse. That may be a theme in his life. He never truly believed that he could make things worse. And progressively, we have seen that things are getting worse for him. I don't know if they're going to get any worse than they have now, with him being stripped of his title prince. But for a long time, there was this decline. And I imagine that along the way, he probably thought he had reached the worst point on several occasions. Like more embarrassment, more harm, that wasn't going to happen. He finally hit rock bottom. Now maybe he has, so his feeling would be valid if he thought that there was nowhere to go down from here. He would need a backhoe to dig himself any deeper. However, Andrew has an amazing ability for getting in trouble. So who knows? Maybe he'll be renting that machine shortly.